What's the worst defense you've seen someone make in a court? I was in traffic court and the first guy to go before the judge got pulled over doing some crazy speed. Like 140 miles per hour. The judge essentially told the guy to say he wouldn't ever do it again and that it was a mistake. And in return, the judge would drop the ticket fee and the points on his record. The guy countered with, "Well, I drive that fast all the time. So I'm really good at it. And I don't think it was dangerous at all because of how good of a driver I am." Double quote. Guy could have walked out totally free. But instead got a $2,500 FNE and 2 points on his record. Reminds me of a story about Butch Cassidy, the famous robber in the Old West. He was captured in Wyoming and brought before a judge. The judge said that he would let him go if he promised never to break the law again. Cassidy said that he couldn't do that, but he would promise never to break the law in Wyoming. And the judge took that deal and Cassidy lived up to it. Anytime his gang planned a job in Wyoming he opted out. A domestic abuse case. The husband was the accused. The couple was in their late 70s or early 80s. When asked if he did indeed abuse his wife, the husband started complaining that some 40 years ago the wife pretended to be ill and he had to do the laundry all by himself. As if he expected the judge to just go, "Oh, okay. I guess that's cool then." I never touched my daughters. I never hurt my daughters. Never would I sexually abuse my daughters. Except that one time at the cabin. The guy became an instant meme in our country language. Reminds me of a recent case here in Edmonton. Man convicted to 23 years for sexually assaulting his daughter, S, and trying to sell one both online for sex. Said he agreed he was guilty in the eyes of the law, but felt he did nothing wrong since he was married to the girl, also his daughter, and the Bible says it's allowed between a man and his wife. The judge let the man talk for 3 whole hours. I took a guy to small claims court. His defense was I didn't have the product, so I couldn't ship it to him. Obviously. The judge was like, "But you took his money?" The guy, "Yay. So I could buy the product and ship it to him." Judge, "Did you do that?" Guy, "Not yet." Judge, "Do you have his money?" Guy, "No. I had an emergency and had to spend it. That was that. I won." Edit. Someone gave me gold. Thanks. This was a very stressful period of my life. I took a guy to small claims court because his employee stepson installed the wrong size A handler and installed it backwards. The guy's claim was that he, personally, did not install it and that his stepson was useless. I won because it was his employee that did the work incorrectly. Afterwards the guy asked if he could come get the air handler. Told him no, he should have done that in the first place. I probably could have sued him for more. After giving us the verdict, the judge gave me directions of where to go to file for suing out of small claims court and what paperwork I needed. We had a guy in court when I worked in CPS who beat his kid with a belt. In court, he asked the judge if he could take off his belt and demonstrate how hard he hit his kid by using his jacket on the back of a chair. The judge was like, "Whatevs. Go for it." I was expecting him to half-ass it, but the guy wailed on the chair until the bailiff told him that's enough. Dot. The entire courtroom was like, "Holy shit, dude." Dot. And that's how I got quite possibly the easiest child removal to date. Not that I had any thought I'd lose the case. The pictures were horrific and that kid will have scars from that beating for life. Close bracket. I briefly dated a physically abusive man about 15 years ago. After the final night of calling the cops because he was hitting me, my ex-boyfriend came over to my parents' house to demonstrate that he did not in fact hit me as hard as I claimed. So he hit the wall to demonstrate. Which the force was so hard that it knocked the picture frames off the wall and it scared our big German shepherd enough that she ran out of the room. The fact that he hit me at all should have been reason enough for my parents to throw his out of our house. But my parents are always just trying to be nice, I roll. Not in court, but I saw the guy pulled over and cops were trying to give him a field sobriety test. He said he couldn't walk in a straight line toe to toe because he was a tugboat captain and his balance wasn't normal. We were on a bar patio within earshot and we f-king fell out. Even the cops were laughing right in this dipshit's face. Needless to say, he got cuffed and stuffed. Was in court for a traffic violation in the state of Florida. I'm sitting with a room full of people who are also contesting their tickets. There was a lady who looked like she was a waitress who got up to make her case in front of the judge. She point blank told the judge in front of the officer that ticketed her that her violation was bullshit from a know-it-all cop. The judge then questioned the officer. "Your Honor, the defendant's car was going 75 and 35 and ran several stoplights." The judge then proceeded to ask why those charges were unreasonable. Her answer was parody level. "I was drinking last night and woke up late. I couldn't lose another job, so I needed to be on time." She ended up paying $500 for wasting the judge's time in addition to her tickets. When I was watching my sister get sentenced for a minor offense, I listened to this court-appointed attorney talk about this 18-year-old girl who was in trouble for hitting her 50-year-old co-worker's car and not telling anyone until the co-worker noticed. The co-worker was yelling and carrying on about how this obviously pretty concerned 18-year-old girl wouldn't even acknowledge her at work anymore and how she found her cocky and disrespectful. Her court-appointed attorney basically just said, "She told me she was afraid of you and wanted to stay out of your way while this was being worked out." And the woman screamed, "That's ridiculous." Double quote. As far as defending yourself goes, that wasn't a great way to do it. Story from driver's ed. Guy was in court for killing two relatively young gals while drunk. Defendant lawyer claimed that the young girls should be at fault because this man was drunk and the girl was sober. She should have had the reaction time to get out of the way. Pretty stupid offense. But in terms of the worst defense, nothing beats that. Absolutely appalling. I overheard this guy tell the officer that yes, his car license is suspended, but I don't remember the correct terminology, the driving truck one isn't and neither is his motor license. Three people and the judge tried to explain that a suspended license means he's lost his privilege to drive in general and altogether. He kept fighting it and saying he wasn't fixing anything cause he's now driving a moped and that license is still okay. He came out with saying it's suspended for several old DUIs. Traffic court. Guy said he had been speeding accidentally because the speedometer in the exotic foreign car he borrowed was marked in kilometers, not miles. The failed at math, judge actually bought this defense, even though driving at 85 miles per hour would have been displayed as 136 kmph. Well, I'm not saying it's a valid defense, but the argument here wouldn't be that he thought that the kph would directly translate into mph. Because you're right, he would have been speeding anyway. The argument would be that he knew and was doing the conversion wrong without realizing it. Was sitting in court for traffic violation. The guy in front of me had a speeding ticket. To fight it, he pulled out a large stack of papers, about 3/4 of an inch thick. The stack of papers was a law he pulled out from the 1990s from a different country. The poor judge had to read through. Why did the judge have to read it if it was from a different country? They found out it's from a different country while reading it. The judge tossed it out after she found out. At the very end of the documents it says these are the laws of the Malaysian people. Thank you for reading. Double quote. I had a guy come into my jail with a robbery charge. He tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding because he just took a girl's money and kept the weed he was supposed to buy her for himself, so at most he was just a shitty boyfriend. He made his situation worse by throwing in, "Did she tell you we're fucking? She was underage." Mine is sort of a worst best defense sort of scenario. A few years ago I was doing jury duty at Crown Court in the Old Bailey. It was to judge this gang violence case against a Sri Lankan gang in London. Essentially, someone had gotten attacked with a machete in a car park and left for dead. There were 6 suspects in this trial, 2 of which had left the country. What was very clear was that all 6 of these people were in complete cahoots. Every one of these 4 came to trial and blamed one other. So no one got blamed twice, but every one of them got the blame placed on them. Most of the evidence pointed to one of the guys in the trial, or one of the guys that had left the country. We had to vote not guilty because there was so much reasonable doubt against all of them that none of them could be prosecuted. So they essentially all got let off because they all collaborated and lied really well. Essentially. Yeah. We couldn't prosecute any one of them because there was doubt with all of them. It was absolutely infuriating because it was completely clear what they were doing. But the way the justice system is set up meant that we couldn't send any one of them away because there was doubt all around. I knew a guy that was charged with pimping a 17-year-old girl. Mind you, he didn't tell anyone he knew she was 17. I won't get into the morality of pimping because that's another subject entirely. But his defense was that he wasn't a pimp. He was a rapper and a drug dealer. Like, why the FCK would you admit to being a drug dealer? They threw the book at his ass with like 20-26 years. New law for pimping minors. Statutory rape. Etc. And X200B. Edit. He actually was a drug dealer too. So maybe he thought it would work? Lol. But they clearly had recordings of him from jail where he was talking to this girl and outing himself like an idiot. Wasn't legit caught. Just caught to change my last name. I was 14 and wanted to change my last name to my stepdad's. My biological father had to be present for the appointment and sign off on it. It went something like this. Judge, okay, if everyone will sign here your name will be changed. Bio dad. I'm not signing. Judge, why not? Double quote. Bio dad. What if she gets pregnant out of wedlock? I want the baby to have my last name. Double quote. And X200B. Reminder that I was 14 years old. Had never even kissed a boy. And I hadn't spoken to my dad in at least 5 years. The judge told him that was an irrelevant point and convinced him to sign the paper. I was glad to leave that part of my life behind me that day. During law school in class I had to defend a hotel manager who was putting hidden cameras in the rooms. Edit. Since this blew up, I want to note this was probably a civil suit and motion to dismiss. I could only really argue the law, not facts. I.e. the goal is to convince the judge that the conduct, as alleged, was not unlawful. I couldn't really get into issues of evidence or if he really planted the cameras and so on. And settling was not part of the exercise. I had no ideas. Case law was pretty much in thorough consensus that it is in fact unlawful to do that. Yet, I had to put something together for oral argument. And also answer questions from the teacher judge. It was a total disaster. I remained somewhat composed. Somehow. But I really had no argument. The best I could do was that it was a digital camera and the files had never been opened or viewed, as far as evidence showed. So in some sense there never had been an actual image of the hotel guests. Just a bunch of 1s and 0s that could of course become a video as soon as someone opened the file with proper software. It was a shitty and unconvincing argument. I gave testimony as a health professional in a child custody case. The mother wanted to revoke the father's joint physical custody of the 8-year-old girl. The issue was that girl was asked to wipe her father's butt, apply lotion, and wash his genitals. The father's case was that because he was obese, fatigued, suffering from frequent diarrhea, and taxed to take care of his own hygiene without assistance, it was acceptable for her to do this as long as she wore gloves to avoid contracting hepatitis C from him. He also argued that it taught her a lesson about compassion and caring for those unable to do so themselves, and helped them to bond. Truly incredible. When my cousin was on a jury for a domestic case, the woman was put in the hospital by her boyfriend. She was in a coma for 18 months and couldn't even appear in court. Apparently the guy pushed her through a door and down the stairs. The guy's defense lawyer was actually trying to get him off with a lighter sentence, but then the guy opened his mouth and tried using the defense of if she would have just listened to me about not touching my gun I wouldn't have gotten so mad. I didn't think the push was strong enough to put her through the door. I didn't mean to put her in a coma. It just happens. When my cousin told me this I couldn't believe it. He ended up spending 3 years in jail and is no longer allowed to possess weapons. He was deemed mentally incapable of handling such things. I work in a personal injury firm and have worked in a couple other firms in the past. not a lawyer. Absolutely everyone will blow their damn case the second they're allowed to speak for themselves. Sometimes even if they are right. My boss tells a story about a client he had who misunderstood pre-existing and so was insistent that her injuries from an auto accident were pre-existing conditions in her deposition. Boss finally asked her to define pre-existing and they all found out the last half hour of the deposition was unusable. Hands down it's a tie between every sovereign citizen I've seen in court for a simple traffic violation like displaying expired plates or not registering a vehicle. The defense is always a stupid variation of this court doesn't have jurisdiction because the wrong flag is displayed in the courtroom. Double quote. No. You see, Your Honor. I wasn't driving my car. I was traveling with my vehicle. You have no authority over me because according to maritime law, my body is a sea traveling vessel. Sexual assault trial we had this past summer. Guy brutally raped a woman in a park. Then took her bike and ATM card. A few minutes later he is recorded withdrawing $80 from her account. He is arrested within hours of the assault. At trial, he testified that the sex was consensual and the victim enjoyed performing oral on him so much that she gave him the bike and ATM card to show her appreciation and that someone else came along and beat her after he left. He also practiced his planned testimony with an inmate who had just been sentenced on a gun charge and bragged about the sexual assault in detail. That inmate threw him under the bus and testified against him. Gun charge inmate freely admitted he hoped rapist would wind up in the same prison he did so he could hand out some RedditJar justice. Running dope and guns was one thing, but he couldn't tolerate someone touching a woman. It didn't take long for a guilty verdict and life sentence. A guy was in court for a DUI, and he insisted on taking the stand when his lawyer advised him not to. Turned out he wanted the judge to know the cop who arrested him was just some rude kid trying to be a big shot and he wasn't even drunk. He'd only had 2 bottles of wine with dinner. His lawyer interrupted him to try to get him to stop talking and he told his lawyer to shut up. Then the judge advised him to listen to his lawyer. And he told the judge, I'm not a damn child. Don't interrupt me, and the judge just smiled and sat back and said, please proceed. We all knew it was over for this guy. He got maxed on the charge and advised in the future if he was going to pay for a lawyer, he should listen to him. I was a juror for a case against a woman that was charged with selling a stolen gun to a pawnbroker and possession of a gun by a convicted felon. She took the stand and admitted to finding the gun at a friend's house and taking it to the pawnbroker. Her attorney's entire closing argument was that the state failed to prove that it was a gun and the charges should be dropped. Never mind the fact that she admitted to it being a gun. The guy that owned the gun said it was his gun and we had it right there in front of us. The defense said it was not a gun because the state had not fired it to prove it was a gun. And of course, as soon as we get back to the room to deliberate, one of the other jurors said he was not convinced it was a real gun. That was a really long day. Edit. Wow, this is by far the most karma I've ever gotten on a comment. To those wondering, we had the gun in the jury room but it was in a clear plastic box. We did have a bailiff come in at one point to take it out and pull the slide back. We were not allowed to handle it ourselves. Friend of mine once got a ticket for leaving her car standing in the marked off no parking zone in front of a grocery store, which she thought was outrageous because she was just running in to get a pack of smokes. Then she saw how much the ticket was for. Something like $120. Which she thought was just ridiculous because damn it, she was just running in for a pack of smokes. I mean, come on. How is that worth $120? So her plan was to go to court and contest the ticket and point out to the judge how ridiculous that was and offer to compromise at like maybe $40 because for Pete's sake, she was just running in for a pack of smokes and let's be reasonable here. Yes. Her plan was to haggle with the judge over how much the ticket should be worth. So she goes to court and sits there most of the day waiting for her case to be called. And eventually she gets bored and goes outside to grab a smoke and hang out. And while she's out there, her case is called. She missed the whole thing. Didn't even get to try the whole come on. $120? For that? Come on. I'll give you $40 and even that's highway robbery defense on the judge and got hit for the full value of the ticket plus court costs. This feels like a good time to share the story of my first, and only ever, civil trial. I was representing the plaintiff who wanted to evict the defendant from her property for non-payment of rent. After presenting my case, basically just presented the contract to the judge and my client stated she has not been paid for 4 months. This took 5 minutes tops. The judge asked the defendant to present his evidence. The defendant replied, "Ha." The judge said, "Now is your turn to present your case." The defendant said, "I don't understand." The judge leans over the bench and asks, "Why are you here?" The defendant said, "Oh yeah. Right." The defendant then went on a 30-minute tangent about all sorts of things like how he only parks his car so he can see where he is going when he pulls out because that was taught when he was in the military and how he has a very large extended family. I could have objected, but the more he talked, the more the judge disliked him. I actually laughed a couple of times. I was trying not to, but I'd only been a licensed attorney for 3 months and the whole scenario was just completely absurd. After 30 minutes the judge finally asked, "About the rent?" The defendant says, "Oh yeah. I'm not trying to debate that I didn't pay it. That's how I won my first civil trial." Defendant was charged with possession of cocaine after a tiny nugget was found in a crack pipe in her car. An element of that crime is that the defendant knew they possessed cocaine. At the prelim, her attorney had her take the stand and she testified that she had a terrible addiction to crack. Been to rehab a bunch of times with no success. And would basically smoke any crack-like substance she could get her hands on. During his closing, the attorney argued that his client was such a massive crackhead that she couldn't have possibly known she was in possession of cocaine, otherwise she would have smoked it. This novel argument, while probably true, failed to win the day. Was on jury duty. The lawyer tried to challenge the validity of a clear-cut roadside sobriety test in ridiculous ways instead of simply claiming the defendant was simply tired and possibly dehydrated, and thus not under the scope of the specific charges the prosecutor chose, although he would then be on the hook for the charges related to impaired driving with a minor in the car, as that meant there was no dispute of drinking having taken place. We found guilty. Horrible story. A college friend of mine was in SF with his girlfriend on vacation for a weekend. They went to hang out on the beach at night, and she was assaulted by 4 servicemen who were drunk and tearing around in a Jeep. They beat him near death and raped her multiple times. Really awful stuff. Their defense in court was that Coolio's song Gangsta's Paradise had driven them into a violent hypnotic state, causing their judgment to be impaired. They did not win. So my teacher back in law school told me about our public transportation company. They had a lawsuit against them from one of their former employees for firing her for the wrong reason. She was bullied by the personnel and tried to prove it in court, and the public transportation system tried to argue that they did not fire her for that, but instead they fired her for always being sick and taking sick days, which is also illegal to fire someone for that reason. Saw a guy on trial once for, I don't know the exact legal term, failing to comply with a court ruling. So basically the guy went to civil court and lost and was told to do something. I think pay a fine to the defendant. He didn't do it and was brought to criminal court and chose to represent himself. He rather smugly pointed out to the judge that the fine he failed to pay was a civil matter and why are we even in a criminal court. The judge calmly explained to him that the original matter may have been civil, but that matter was already settled, and failure to comply with a court ruling was a criminal matter. And that's why we're here today. His entire defense seemed to be reliant on that one argument. And when it failed, he had nothing to fall back on, and asked for a public defender. Bruh. I remember going with my mom to court for some pretty traffic ticket. It was a mass of people all waiting to talk to the judge about their tickets, and halfway in, one lady walks up for a ticket for not stopping at a red light. She first said that the light was yellow, then said okay it was red, then said the law doesn't apply because she was on a bike, not a car. The judge laughed and some of the other people in there including my mom laughed under their breath and she left with a bright red face and she has to pay the ticket in full. Traffic court. Elderly gentleman was pulled over for not wearing his seatbelt and swerving erratically. He told the judge that he needed to remove his seatbelt so he could reach his heart medicine because he was having chest pains. Judge looked at him like he had 3 heads and asked, roughly, so you thought you were having a heart attack and instead of pulling off the road you removed your seatbelt so you could fumble through your glove box trying to find your medicine? Apostrophe. Google sovereign citizens. By far the weirdest experience in court. And as an attorney that is saying something. This guy tried to argue that a combination of maritime law, Indian treaties and the Uniform Commercial Code allowed him to decide which laws applied to him and which did not. It also took 20 minutes to get him to admit he was the defendant and not a corporation with the same name. Jesus. As part of my university course I had to sit in on a court case and create a court report. I turned up on a random day and asked to enter for my course and they allowed it. Turned out I was in a hearing about a man who was sexually abusing his stepdaughter and her friends. A key piece of evidence was a photo of his daughter tied to a bed and stripped. It was very obviously her. Her full face was in view and she also had a very recognizable and undeniable birthmark on her jaw. The man's defense was that this couldn't have been taken by him as he didn't recognize the girl in the photo. Judge damn near laughed at him there in the courtroom. I went to court because my next door neighbor tried to drive drunk. And when his truck wouldn't move, he got so angry that he threw several of the complex's large 6 inches landscaping rocks through the windshield. One missed and hit my car, leaving a large dent on the hood, several scrapes, and about $1,000 in damage. He then moved his truck a few spaces over, leaving a truck-shaped hole in the glass that was all over the ground next to my car. The rocks were still in his cab. The other rock was still on my hood. I called the police and this 32-year-old man, had his mom lie to the cops for him. For some reason, they found my story more plausible. At court, he showed up drunk. His lawyer asked for a delay, and the judge approved it, and promptly recused himself, as he himself had represented this man 15+ years earlier. Now but my drunk ex-husband came to family court with his lawyer after I was asking for any remaining custody be taken and replaced with supervision. He was caught drinking and driving a second time. This time with my kids in the car. He's a cop so there could be more that was covered up since the first time was on duty and the department tried to hide it. Anyway, his attorney said I was kicking a guy while he was down. That's what his legal defenses was. To me that was the most idiotic argument regarding the safety of my kids. My ex literally goes to calls of drunk driving accidents where people died and still put our kids in danger.